There is nothing wrong with using porn.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with masturbating. I think the rate right now is 40% of young adults have tried a drug.
7 full years before someone seeks help.
I'm not talking about alternate treatments. There are subjective tests for depression. This is what depression would look like. This is what anxiety would look like. You know what we usually find parents come in with? A drop in academic performance.
Chatpati stories, phenomenal information and awesome conversation जो करेंगी आपको help. The Sam Kachru.
Depression, anxiety, addiction. The very best kept family secrets of India. आज करेंगे हम इसको डिकोड. मेरे साथ हैं श्रेया पंजवानी, licensed clinical psychologist. She will tell us how do you do prevention in any of these. प्रिवेंशन के बाद क्या आता है? डायग्नोसिस. पता कैसे चलेगा कि हमें एनी ऑफ दीज प्रॉब्लम्स हमें भी हैं, क्योंकि आपको भी हो सकती हैं. उसके साथ में हाउ डू यू परफॉर्म अ रोल वे यू स्टार्ट एक्सेप्टिंग दिस एज अ प्रॉब्लम कि आपको ये है, एंड देन फाइनली द क्योर. लेट्स हैव अ वर्ड विद श्रेया सिटिंग राइट हियर विद अस. ओके श्रेया, लेट्स मूव डायरेक्टली इनटू टॉकिंग अबाउट डिप्रेशन. जहाँ तक मुझे पता है 2017 there was an article, and this is pre-COVID, which said 5 crore Indians are suffering from depression, and this is just the reported number. I want your take on that.
Well, I think all I can say is that those numbers are dependable. And since we've gotten into numbers, I'm going to give you some more eye-opening stats about depression. So what we have from the WHO at this point is that from 2005 to 2015, there was an increase in 8% in the rate of depression in India. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
Right? Added to that, we were leading in suicide rate in the year 2012.
Globally?
Yes, globally. Right. These are hard numbers.
It's not as though we should give ourselves a pat on the back for something like that. It's a big number.
Absolutely not. And like you correctly pointed out, this was pre-COVID. So we've sort of been facing trouble much before COVID arrived, but COVID has become an easy scapegoat.
Can you put a finger onto it ki what's the prime reason or what's the few reasons why people out there are suffering from depression?
There's no one reason. Of course, this is biological as well. And I think everybody needs to understand that depression too is a disease, right? It is something that we classify in different manuals. In the international classification of diseases, it is a disease. So it is something that is biological. Of course, it is maintained by a lot of environmental factors, things that are going on in people's lives, and it isn't easy. And that can lead to maintaining depression over a period of time.
So how I see depression as a layman, of course, I'm not a specialist in this field, but I think it's when a lot of stuff keeps piling on top of each other over a period of time. That pile up leads to a depressive mental state of mind. Am I thinking along the right lines?
That's a great question, Sam. In fact, there are two types of onset in any mental health disorder. It is an acute or a chronic onset. So acute is when something starts suddenly. Overnight you see changes and symptoms come up. And then chronic is something that has built up over a period of time. And then at one particular time, we can say that yes, this person can be diagnosed with a particular disorder. Right? So it can be either of the two with depression as well. For example, with substance-induced depression. That is if somebody's had a substance that has led to depressive symptoms.
Can you elaborate that?
Sure. So for example, addiction is becoming a huge problem all over the world as well as in India right now.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are having a cocktail of drugs. Right? A lot of times those drugs can lead to substance-induced psychosis.
Oh.
Right? So if you've had or you've overdosed on something, and everybody is different, nobody is going to react the same way, there can be a sudden onset of symptoms such as delusions or hallucinations.
Right.
Or there can be a slow progress where you first see that this person is unable to, say, focus as well as before. Then you find that they're feeling very low. You find that they are not as interested in things as before, not enjoying things like before. There's a change in sleep and appetite eventually. That is a slow onset of symptoms.
Of depression.
Yes, of depression.
Yeah. So I've got to add on to that because I've had a lot of people I've known very dearly who've actually talked about shooting pains. They've talked about pains right from headaches all the way to the heart, all the way down to the toes. Now, they went for MRIs, CT scans. Nothing revealed the truth that this was actually depressive mental state of mind leading to that vis-a-vis a heart attack. So have you had cases of those sort?
Absolutely. So many cases of that kind. I'll narrate to you a story about this lady in her early 30s that came to therapy. So what happened with her is over a period of approximately 5 years before that, she would make her husband rush her to the emergency at night, saying that she's having certain palpitations and she's sure that something's wrong with her heart and she thinks it's a heart attack. And, out of fear, he diligently would take her to the hospital, every other week.
Yep.
And it was very difficult. It poses a challenge to somebody's daily living to have to do that. But she kept going back. She would get to the hospital, they would check her up, they would say, kuch gadbad nahi hai, and she would come back home after maybe an injection or something. Finally, after 5 years, somebody in the emergency told her that maybe you want to see a psychologist. Maybe you want to address this.
It took her 5 years.
5 years. I mean, at this point in time, I want to talk to you about the pathway to care. It is an average of 7 years. What that means is that from the onset of symptoms to getting actual help, there is an average period of 7 years for people in India.
That's worth a pause for a while.
Yes.
7 full years before someone seeks help.
Yes.
And that's
actual professional help. I'm not talking about alternate treatments. I'm not talking about a lot of other things that people resort to in India. Getting actual medication or therapy takes up to 7 years at times.
incredible.
Yeah.
So tell me one thing. When we talk about depression, how I, again, as a layman, break it down is that I look at any disease, like you rightly mentioned, it's a disease. We can look at prevention.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about the diagnosis part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about the acceptance part of it. And finally, the fourth aspect to me would be the cure. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the first part.
Right.
Can I prevent it?
We have to accept that this is a biological problem as well. So it's not preventable entirely. But yes, we can advocate better mental health, stronger mental health from a younger age. And that would be preventive in nature.
Right. So learning about it, you mean talking about it, sharing would be preventive?
Yes.
It's interesting.
Right? And the younger you start talking about emotions, talking about sharing, the better. Right? So, now in schools, we advocate that at the age of 4 or 5, children are becoming aware of their emotions. They know they're feeling sad. They know that they felt angry with something. Right? But they don't know how to name it. They don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
But if you give them the tools and you say, okay, you seem angry, the child automatically learns, okay, what I'm feeling right now seems like anger. Then we start talking to them over a period of time that this is what emotions are, this is what a mood is, this is what depression would look like, this is what anxiety would look like. Anxiety is a much more common problem these days than depression. But if we start having open communication with them about it, they'll be able to understand it, explain it, and of course intervene before it becomes very severe. So that automatically is preventive in nature.
You talked about two things right now. You talked about emotions and you talked about a mood. Are they distinctly different in nature, or are they the same thing in just said in two different ways?
Good catch. Yes, they are different in nature. So how we understand psychologically is that an emotion is more short-lived.
Yeah.
Right? I'm happy right now, or I'm angry right now. You feel it for some time and then it passes. Whereas the mood is more long-term. Right? So when we talk about a depressive mood, depression has to be for at least a period of 2 weeks. Only then can you be diagnosed with clinical depression.
Right.
Anybody and everybody can feel sad every now and then,
Yes.
right? But a clinical depression is at least 2 weeks or more.
Now you talked about diagnosis, so let's move into that. So see, it's so easy to diagnose through blood work if I have a viral, if I have dengue, if I have any other particular ailment. Depression is something, it's very difficult to put on any scale or to diagnose. What would you recommend to the general public hearing this podcast in terms of how would they self-diagnose something like this?
All right. So, like you correctly pointed out, it's not tangible, right? So I can't point it out to you on a screen or through blood work. There are subjective tests for depression. So all psychologists and psychiatrists are equipped to diagnose depression and test for it subjectively, right? But coming to the second part of your question, how do I know if I need help? Okay. So the 3 main symptoms of depression are a low mood, like I said, at least for a period of 2 weeks, loss of pleasure in activities that you earlier enjoyed, and a loss of interest in general.
Yeah.
Right? So I lose interest in going out, I lose interest in watching a movie, socializing with friends, going to work, just daily things, right? Those are the 3 main symptoms.
Right.
Added to that, there is poor concentration, there is feelings of guilt, low self-esteem, in severe cases, suicidal thoughts, and of course, changes in sleep and appetite.
Yeah.
So if you're seeing at least 5 of these symptoms, right?
Yeah.
Either one of the first 3 or 5 of all of them,
Sure.
means you can seek help.
Okay. And the acceptance part, does that really come in, or is it just very theoretical? And and I'm trying to live in a make-believe world where people would hear podcasts like these and sort of benefit their life by saying and accepting the fact that maybe what Shreya sitting right here is saying is happening to me. I want to accept it. So what are the levels of acceptance in India currently or globally? Just asking you a off-the-cuff sort of a figure.
I'll be very honest with you. Acceptance levels are very, very low right now. I mean, open communication like this or podcast does help people identify that something may be going on, right? That they do need to address something, or perhaps feel that they're not alone in this. That if it's being talked about, that means it is a shared experience. However, it takes a long time and a lot of suffering for somebody to accept that they need to seek help, or this actually may be depression or clinical anxiety.
What's the cure of this then? How do we reach, because let's say that someone has accepted it, let's say a family member diagnosed it on their own and brought the patient in. How would you as a medical professional help someone who is undergoing such a mental state of mind?
Okay, that's a long answer. Everybody is unique. I want to start there. So there's no one approach that we use for everyone. And as a psychologist working in India, I use an eclectic approach. That is, I combine many schools of thought to address the goals for one client. Right? So say, for example, somebody is coming to me with a low mood over a significant period of time. I'll take a detailed history first to understand what may be going on with them. I'll also understand the family history. Basis all the information that I collect, I'll form an intervention plan.
Okay.
Right? With certain goals. It's pretty much the same as a medical diagnosis. Right? They'll take a full history. Basis the history, they'll make a plan or the medication, the first line, the second line of medication, and assert certain goals. And then finally, we start working towards meeting those goals.
Okay.
right? So it's a very systematic and well-researched process.
So cure is not found at home on your own. Cure is found when you go to a medical professional.
Preferably, yes.
And the stages of that being, who do you go to first? Who are the few people that you can actually go to and talk to?
Yeah. So you can approach any mental health professional, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So in psychologists, there are many types of psychologists. Typically, if you are experiencing a mental health problem like depression or anxiety or addiction, you would want to go to a clinical psychologist. So you would want to check that they have a license from the Rehabilitation Council of India, right? And of course, psychiatrists have an MBBS degree and an MD in psychiatry, and they can prescribe medication. If the problem is very severe, if you feel that you yourself or a family member is not going to benefit from talking right now, you may want to go to a psychiatrist first. The psychiatrist will guide you to a psychologist as well if they feel the need.
All right.
Similarly, you can go to a psychologist first, and if the psychologist feels that you need medication, they will refer you to a psychiatrist.
All right. So that makes sense. Thank you for that. So what we'll do is we'll move now from depression and move towards anxiety. So the common way of looking at everything is that you know how it is in any household. People will mix the two as one. So there's इसको depression, anxiety दोनों हो गई है. Yeah, they don't know the distinction.
Yeah.
Now, in my layman way of understanding, I'd like to present what I think anxiety is. Of course, you have a clinical way to describe the same. How I would like to look at it is exactly the opposite of what depression was, where I was looking at the past, accumulative sort of circumstances making me depressed.
And then?
I'm looking at anxiety being looking ahead to the future.
Right.
And when I'm looking ahead to the future, I'm bringing in a lot of anxiousness, and anxiousness being the word that I'm using here, relating to anxiety. Am I thinking along the right lines?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And people aren't wrong. When they're confusing anxiety and depression, they are comorbid very often. What that means is that the two occur together very often. So if somebody has had chronic anxiety, they in all likelihood will develop depressive symptoms as well. And if somebody has been depressed for a long time, they will develop symptoms of anxiety as well. How the two are different is, like you correctly pointed out, depression is more rooted in the past. ये हो गया मेरे साथ, तो उदासी हो रही है उसके बारे में. And anxiety is more to do with the future. What if this happens? घबराहट हो रही है उसके लिए. Right? So that is a very important difference between the two.
Right. So if I were to go in the same way now, can you prevent anxiety? Is it possible?
You tell me.
Okay. I feel that anxiety is something, if I don't expect something from myself,
Really?
I will start living in the present. I think and I'm coming from a philosophical perspective on this, right? Having studied a little bit of psychology as well, and from my sports background, we were always told to live today, because the minute we start thinking about tomorrow, it's not a controllable.
Yes.
So we're always taught in sports, control the controllables. So for me, it is as simple as that. If I have to get rid of anxiety, I would sit myself down and say, आज मुझे जीना है जो मैं जी रहा हूँ, कल मेरे कंट्रोल में नहीं है. Is that how you would look at it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think first we need to educate people that anxiety is a very normal emotion. Everybody is going to feel anxious sooner or later at some point in their lives, and anxiety is not all bad. From the evolutionary perspective, anxiety is one of the reasons that we survived. Right?
Sure.
Imagine seeing something dangerous in front of you and not feeling anxious.
Hard to imagine.
Right? But if you didn't feel anxious, you wouldn't do something to protect yourself.
True.
Right? Now the mind is unaware whether this is a real threat to your survival or it is a psychological threat. Right? So let's go back to, you playing sports at some point in time. When you felt anxious, you wanted to do something to improve your performance.
Yes.
Right? So you spoke to a coach, you watched videos, you read about it, you said, okay, how do I get better? That was because you felt anxious.
Yes.
However, if anxiety crosses a particular point, that is when it starts becoming problematic. So it interferes with your performance thereafter. It interferes with daily living thereafter. And that is where, again, mental health comes in. Right? So preventive, again, if I start talking at an early age about anxiety, so many students experience anxiety, in school, whether it comes to performance academically, whether it comes to performance otherwise, they're all feeling anxious.
Yes.
There's so much competition right now.
And that drives me to my next point, which is that we talked about depression, and let's club that for a moment with anxiety. So you had mentioned stuff about students, so I just want to take off from that and talk about certain demographics. We live in a sort of a world where people imagine that it's only adults or senior citizens who may have economic issues and adult issues, so they're suffering from depression and anxiety. I am sure there must be some cases in the adolescent youth of India and the globe which is also suffering from both of these problems. Can you throw some light on that?
I mean, statistically speaking, the UNESCO has shown that at least 1 in 20 children is also suffering from severe mental health problems. Right?
1 in 20?
1 in 20.
That's 5%
yes,
of the world.
5% of children, of adolescents, of young adults. Right? And
of the world.
Yes.
And this is reported.
This is reported. Yes. And now think about it. Psychologically speaking, adolescence is one of the toughest periods in the entire lifespan. It is a period of transition from going from childhood and having no responsibility, being dependent on somebody else for everything, to becoming responsible adults. You're suddenly thinking about bodily changes. You're thinking about career. You're thinking about which university you're going to get into, what you want to become. Are your parents satisfied with your performance? How are teachers looking out? How does the peer group, view you?
Yeah.
Right? What is my self-identity? So all of those are reasons that adolescents and young adults are actually more vulnerable.
Sure. So when we look at adolescents, see, they will not put their hand up and say straight away that I've got this problem. They're not capable of diagnosing, accepting, and curing. That's not possible.
Yeah.
So they will always be dependent on a parent to do it for them. Now, is there enough education happening in the parents of today who are looking out for symptoms leading to a cure for both these problems, depression and anxiety? Do you see that happening currently?
What we usually find parents come in with? A drop in academic performance. That will be the first red flag for them ki kuch gadbad hai. Right? And when we go into the history, the problem started a long time ago. Right? So it started with this child perhaps being more isolated, keeping to themselves, not being able to focus in class, not enjoying going to school, refusing to go to school. And they'll say, kuch nahi hai, teenager hai, aise hi chalta rehta hai. And suddenly there'll be a dip in performance.
Yeah.
And then the teacher will say that, aap assessment karao. And then the parent will say, oh, something is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when they'll come for help. And of course, the child is not aware. They're only feeling different. That first step of actually seeking help usually comes from a family member.
So that's something that parents of today need to look out for.
Yes, they need to be educated.
Now let's move on and have a discussion on a very interesting part now of this podcast today, which is about addiction. This is the third final segment I wanted to cover. And addiction being prevalent in society, there's like you talked about substance abuse today. Okay, that's one. So that's drug abuse in front of us. There is screen addiction when we look at kids, and there's many more. I want you to sort of shed light. How many kinds of addiction are there available today in the world?
Yeah. So first, talking about prevalence, Again, I think the rate right now is 40% of young adults have tried a drug. That's almost half, and that is only the reported part. 40%. That is huge.
I wouldn't have bought that number. Really?
Yes. So that is what is recorded. Now, like you correctly pointed out, there are different types of addiction. The most common are drug, alcohol. Screen addiction is increasing at a rampant rate. But along with that, there is also porn and gambling.
Yeah.
That is increasing a lot as well. So these are the different kinds of addictions that are posing a threat to young adults as well as...
And I'll tell you what, you mentioned porn and gambling. Now, in an addiction like porn, see, screen addiction for a kid, you can see. A parent can diagnose. We've talked throughout this podcast about understanding prevention, then diagnosis from there. So that's like a blood work in front of you. I can see a kid playing all day on a mobile phone. I know he's addicted.
Yeah.
But when it comes to porn addiction, it's done in seclusion, in isolation. And acceptance is almost zero because you don't think you're addicted. So, and no one else is seeing that activity. How do you get anyone to accept this and go for cure? Because globally, there's a lot of talk, and I'm happy you brought that subject up right now. Globally, there's a lot of talk about porn addiction. There are people putting their hand up, but they're all in their 30s now who've gone through it for 15 years and now they're addicted, right? Have you had any real live cases come to you, could be male or female? I would love for you to shed a light on that, because I don't know what they would have come and talk to you about.
So, like you correctly pointed out, it is very difficult to talk about. It isn't an easy subject to discuss openly, or for that matter, in therapy. So what I find is that a lot of people will come with problems like depression or addiction or high anxiety, and it'll be over a period of approximately 5 to 6 months when they will start opening up about, say, porn addiction or even drug abuse at times. Right? And I understand that it isn't easy to talk about, and the response varies so much. For example, I had somebody in his late 20s doing very well professionally come to therapy and talk about, well, he was initially diagnosed with depression, was getting medication for it as well. And over a period of time, he started opening up about his relationship with his girlfriend and how that wasn't going very well. As a matter of fact, we delved into physical intimacy at some point as well, and we tried to understand what may have been happening over there. And that is when he started coming out with how much he was using porn and masturbating.
Oh, wow.
Now, there is nothing wrong with using porn.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with masturbating. There is nothing wrong with the occasional use of alcohol, substances.
Yeah.
However, when you see that you are unable to say no to it, then we know it is a problem. Or we find that it is interfering with your life. For example, I can't go to sleep at night unless I've had a couple of drinks. I can't wake up in the morning or go to work unless I've had a joint.
Yeah.
Then we know.
So it's a have-to scenario, which sets in over a period of time.
Yes.
In addiction.
Yes.
So where are the red flags?
Good question. So we divide addiction into use, abuse, or dependence.
Okay.
Right? Use is when you are occasionally or socially indulging in an activity or using a substance. Very safe, not posing a threat to your daily living. Abuse is when you start building a tolerance towards this substance. And I'll come back to the neurochemical part of this a little later. But like I said, I have to use it in order to get something done or to not do something. Right? I'm feeling a particular way. I have to use this substance to not feel sad, to not feel anxious.
For that reward. You need that reward.
Right. That is abuse.
Yeah.
right? And dependence is more a physical thing.
Yeah.
So I crave the substance now, right? I felt that high. Now that high has gone, I need the substance again physically. I'm craving it.
Yeah.
That is the portrayal that you'll see in movies most of the time,
Yes.
right? Where the person is very antsy to get that substance,
Yes.
right? So the latter two are red flags.
Right. So even Sanjay Dutt in his, whatever's written up on him and, in his movie as well, and it's very well documented, he mentioned the fact that, he used to take uppers and then to get rid of the high that he was at, he used to take downers. And then that cycle just kept continuing. It became an have to.
Yes.
A have to scenario, not I'm just trying it out sorts, right? You think that is addiction, and it can be self-caught, or do you think we need to have a near and dear one sort of catch it?
It can be either way. Self-acceptance in addiction is very difficult.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to reach that point where somebody accepts that they are addicted. Typically, people coming to therapy, even if I have diagnosed them with addiction, will say, but I can leave this. You tell me right now to leave it, I leave it.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed. So what is the cure for this, for addiction? For all of these addictions, we talked about screen, we talked about porn, we talked about whichever other. Now, what is the cure? Who do they go to?
That's right. So again, I'm going to go back slightly to a biological perspective.
Sure, of course.
Now over here, when it comes to addiction, there is a neurochemical called dopamine. Every time we use a substance, there is something called dopamine, which is a neurochemical that is released in the brain.
Yeah.
This chemical activates the reward center, which basically means that I feel good after doing this. I feel reinforced.
Yes.
So I want to do more of it, right? So biologically speaking, this becomes a pattern of addiction because I want more and more of this substance to feel that sense of achievement, that sense of reward.
And does this sense of achievement keep increasing in nature or decreasing in nature in terms of when the dopamine is released and I take that drug on a daily basis, is it making me take more and more because it's sort of, I'm getting addicted to it? Or is it not? How does the dopamine work?
Very good question. So dopamine actually builds tolerance over a period of time. What that means is that with the same amount of substance, I'm not going to have the same impact. So lesser and lesser dopamine is released in the brain over a period of time.
Okay.
Which is why we need more and more of the substance. And that is how the addiction happens, because now I need more and more of this to feel that same way.
Because you want that much dopamine kick every time.
Correct.
Right.
Right?
Wow. And what is the cure? Who does someone go to?
So typically, again, you would go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, right? There are multiple rehab centers now. But what one is trying to do is understand what the psychological factors behind the use is, right? So if a family member discovers that, a family member is using a drug or a substance or even alcohol a lot, they'll typically sort of tell them, ye bas karo, ye aur mat karo, right? Now that the person is already aware of.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But what is important is that when you seek professional help, they're aware of certain psychological reasons or theories that lead to addiction. Right? For example, if we talk about avoidance of certain feelings, right? It's called experiential avoidance. What that means is that if somebody is going through a distressing time, they don't want to keep feeling that way.
Yeah.
And as a result, they'll resort to using a substance like alcohol or drugs or even porn and masturbation.
Yeah.
In order to not continue feeling that way.
Sure.
Right? Now, if they don't have any better coping mechanism, the use of these substances will keep increasing.
That's right.
And then it becomes an addiction.
Got it.
I have to understand what is the purpose that it is serving for this person. Right? I don't want to approach them
as a specialist. You need to get that.
I don't want to approach them with shame or judgment. I want to understand.
Shame and judgment brings in another word called stigma and taboo. So it's a stigma, right? If you accept and you actually accept, go talk to a family member, दिल से तू ठीक हो जाएगा कल, फिक्र मत कर, तेरे को डिप्रेशन है, तू ठीक हो जाएगा, ठीक है, ये खा ले क्रोसिन, सब ठीक है. So that's the typical answer people do get over the period of years. Now things are changing, of course, and this is why we're having podcasts like these, where we want an evolution of a mindset,
Right.
to be able to recognize that I think we need to consult
Yes.
as a. So do you go through people who come to you and admit that this is a taboo, there's a stigma, don't let my family members know that I'm here?
So often that people will not want their problems to be revealed to even their spouse. Right? I'll tell you about another young girl who approached me recently. So she had been diagnosed with ADHD, moving into anxiety thereafter. She was struggling in school, in college, and the parents could see it. They put in a lot of effort to help her, and they got her through. Now she wants to relocate from India and go to university outside India.
Yeah.
Right? She's coming to therapy regularly. She's taking her medication regularly. She's maintaining well. Just before leaving the country, her father tells her, "Ab ye sab dawai chhod do.
Oh.
Now everything is working out for you. Just leave it now. What will people think if they find out that you are taking this medication?"
Oh.
So she comes back to therapy, and we try to educate her that this may not be the best option, because relocating of any kind can be stressful.
Yes.
Even if it is for something positive. However, she decided to not take her medication. And unfortunately, about a month later, we get a call in distress from her. She's unable to get out of bed again. She's unable to go to class again. Right? What else is that? That is stigma. That is
Yeah.
shaming them for, using the appropriate medication.
Yeah.
अगर हमें कोलेस्ट्रॉल होता है या बीपी होता है, हम इमीडिएटली डॉक्टर के पास जाते हैं और दवाई लेते हैं. बट अगर मेंटल हेल्थ प्रॉब्लम होती है, जो डिजीज़ है, वी वांट टू अवॉइड मेडिकेशन.
Sure. Thanks, Shreya. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming to our show, and hopefully everyone watching the podcast will definitely understand that depression, anxiety, addiction, they all are not taboos, they're not stigmas, and there is a cure. And the cure starts when they accept. Thank you again for coming.
It's been a pleasure, Sam. Thank you so much.
सब्सक्राइब एंड नोटिफिकेशन की घंटी दबाइए और ये अगला शो जरूर देख के जाइए.